Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts, said Volodymyr Zelenskyy in response to an announcement that the U.S. is suspending military aid for Ukraine. That's the latest from President Zelenskyy, but is Donald Trump ready to return to negotiations? More on that in just a moment, but first, let's see the latest headlines. With U.S. military aid for Ukraine suspended, Europe faces a struggle to fill the gap. As the Polish government pledges unwavering aid to Kyiv, some opposition presidential candidates want to play an anti-Ukrainian game. Chaos ensues in Serbia's parliament as opposition MPs used smoke grenades and tear gas. In just a moment, we are going live to our correspondent in Kyiv, Kyiv, to learn more about Volodymyr Zelenskyy's plan to bring the war in Ukraine to an end under Donald Trump's leadership. Before we learn the details, let's trace the events that led to the latest developments. Following the fiasco which took place in Washington on Friday, the White House has announced a suspension of military aid to Ukraine. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, has this report.
From a diplomatic blow-up in the Oval Office
Mr. President, with respect,
to a frontline shock for Ukraine, Donald Trump temporarily slashing all military aid to the war-torn country. It's another dramatic play in a week that will go down in political history as the Trump White House puts the squeeze on Kyiv to strike a deal with Vladimir Putin.
I want to see it end fast. I don't want to see this go on for years and years.
And so a crackdown on ammunition deliveries, vehicles and other military equipment, including shipments agreed to when Joe Biden was president. Officials insist this is a pause, not a permanent termination, with reports suggesting US military aid will be held back until President Trump believes Ukraine is ready for good faith peace talks, something Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says is already the case.
Fasten your seatbelts because we're about to see some turbulence. Reports coming in from the border and our hub in Rzeszów confirm what the Americans are saying. This puts Europe, Ukraine and Poland in a much tougher spot. But we need to face this situation head-on.
On the streets of Kyiv, residents are confident that they can cope.
It is a simple manipulation and nothing more than that. There is nothing serious behind it. I believe we don't need to worry much about this particular decision. It was predictable because Trump is crazy. I knew it from the very beginning. I am not particularly scared about it because it was predictable. We will sort it out somehow.
But the country's top brass agree that American backing is critical and say Ukraine is ready to sign the hotly negotiated minerals deal.
We count on the US because the significant amount of support, including intelligence exchange and air defense, this is US's contribution. These are important elements that had saved thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives, both civilian and military.
It comes as Trump throws out America's previous foreign policy playbook, instead warming to Russia and launching a trade war with China, leaving a trail of uncertainty over the future of the world order.
He thinks that once he stops supporting Ukraine with arms, Ukraine will just follow whatever he says, which is not the case because Ukrainians fight the existential fight. They know very well that if they stop fighting now on the conditions of Russia, it will be worse for them.
President Trump will address Congress overnight for the first time since returning to power, with Ukraine set to be a key focus as the world awaits what he will say and do next. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Just as promised, we now return to Kyiv to learn more about the Ukrainian response to Donald Trump's move. We're joined by our correspondent, Kyiv. Good evening, So what do we know about the details behind President Zelenskyy's statement and under what circumstance was it announced?
Well, what we have seen take place in Kyiv tonight is a very well-structured, carefully calibrated message targeting Donald Trump. Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government have come in for relentless attacks from Trump, and not only Trump, figures in his administration too, over many issues, chief of which Trump himself saying that Zelenskyy is not interested in peace. So the first line of Zelensky's statement issued tonight says, "I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace." Now, again, we've heard things from Donald Trump that he wanted a public apology from Zelenskyy. That's what US media was reporting. Should he consider signing this mineral deal with Ukraine, he wanted that public apology. And this appears to be what Zelenskyy is saying tonight in this address. Let's take a listen to part of that statement.
Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it in any time and in any convenient format. We see this agreement as a step toward greater security and solid security guarantees, and I truly hope it will work effectively.
Now, we heard from Prime Minister Shmyhal as well earlier on. That was in Aaron's package. Again, on brand, on the same message, saying that they want further cooperation with the United States and they are willing to sign this deal. But Shmyhal did say something else too, that if they had to go it alone, Ukraine would go it alone, and that they would be able to maintain the capabilities on the front line. For how long, that's unclear. The other thing that's unclear, Kyiv has gone through this huge diplomatic push to try and rebuild ties with the Trump administration. The question is, will it be enough? And only one man knows the answer to that, and he's in Washington. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Chatterjee reporting live from Kyiv. It comes as no surprise that the suspension of military aid announced by the White House has far-reaching consequences for Ukraine's defensive capabilities. As a major contributor to Kyiv's efforts to repel Russia, any shortfall could have devastating effects. Although European allies have also supported Ukraine with military hardware, they may struggle to fill the gap. Sasha Farbach reports.
Europe is reeling as the United States seems to be walking away. Donald Trump's decision to suspend all military aid to Ukraine comes as bitter news to Kyiv as well as other traditional allies on the continent.
Europe was preparing for second term of Trump, but we did not expect this at all. And this is a shock, and we know we need to react very fast.
President Donald Trump believes that America has provided the greatest share of support, blaming Europe for falling short.
We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, the U.S. has provided the lion's share, around $67 billion. However, European and other Western allies have collectively also provided around the same number. The fear is, if the U.S. were to completely withdraw, allies would have to front double of what they're providing now. That's around $136 billion worth, a tough ask.
We need to find solutions collectively to make sure that European security is being reinforced, strengthened, and that we can, in the same time, help our Ukrainian partners and friends, and in the same time, being able to rebuild our defense and security capacities in Europe.
The U.S. has been a crucial ally for Ukraine, delivering everything from infantry fighting vehicles to tanks and missiles. America has supplied around 39 HIMARS, while Europe has provided just 43 combined. The U.S. has also sent over 4 million rounds of ammunition, while Europe has fallen short of its 2 million round pledge. However, air defense is one of Ukraine's biggest needs, with experts saying that Europe has a vital opportunity to step up in this area.
We have a lot of air defense missiles. We have a lot of long-range capabilities, like Taurus missiles, JASSMs, Scalp, whatever. We have a lot of artillery ammunition still on the storages. So it's all about making that decision that, okay, we will now take a risk for half a year or a year that we will give our equipment to Ukraine.
Although Europe has scaled up its defense production, there are items like cruise missiles and Patriot batteries where it would be challenging to replace American firepower. There's also the key component of intelligence sharing and Starlink satellites, which have been crucial for Ukrainian forces.
Talking about hardware, you forget about supporting systems. For example, targeting. And the Ukrainians have the capability to strike up to 1,300 kilometers to the Russian oil depots and refineries deep inside Russia. For that, you need targeting information, which the United States have given.
Potential loss of Ukraine's strongest military ally presents a daunting challenge. While Europe will strive to fill the gap, it may not be enough to match the scale of support needed, making Ukraine's fight for survival even harder. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Tuesday was definitely a day of big announcements and declarations. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen revealed her bold proposal to rearm Europe with the aim of amassing roughly €800 billion in defense spending. It comes at a pressing time for the continent as Ukraine's security woes are putting the bloc's defense vulnerabilities sharply into focus. EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports from Brussels.
Europe is in an era of rearmament and must act decisively. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made the announcement on Tuesday before she unveiled her bold proposal on how to rearm Europe. The aim there is to mobilise at least €800 billion in defence spending. This will come through the form of a new investment package as well as loosening up EU fiscal rules. Here is what that EU chief told reporters regarding her proposal.
Europe is ready to massively boost its defence spending, both to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
The most significant measure as part of this five-point plan includes the €150 billion investment pool. Member states are encouraged to apply for this money together. This will allow them to co-finance air defence systems, military operations, as well as anti-drone technology. There will also be an impetus to supply some of this weaponry to Ukraine. European Parliament President Roberta Metsola echoed the support for this measure today in Brussels. She said that supplying Ukraine with arms is not a charity for Europe, but a necessity. Here is what she had to say.
If Kyiv falls, Europe and the world will be less secure, it will be less safe, and it will be less prosperous. And that cost would be eye-wateringly higher than now for all of us and for our children.
Poland's Defence Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz has welcomed the news, however questioned why the European Commission was not proposing that €150 billion investment package as a grant instead of a loan. But what we're hearing from senior EU officials is that this whole package was designed with speed in mind, with some of these instruments being able to be legislated and coming into effect as early as 4 weeks. But they require the final tick of approval at a European Council summit scheduled for Thursday. These European leaders will convene in Brussels to discuss Ukrainian defence and European security. We know that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is expected to be in attendance, and the importance of today's package is underscored by the US President Donald Trump announcing that he will pause sending military aid to Ukraine. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Time to move to Poland, where the issue of Ukraine and its relations with the U.S. is also a topic of heated discussions as the country is headed for a presidential election in May. The main candidates for the country's highest office seem to be split in the middle when it comes to the issue, with the ruling coalition fully supporting Kyiv, while the right-wing and far-right candidates tapping into anti-Ukrainian sentiments. Where does this split come from? Kazimierz Łysiak has the answer.
While presidential candidates from the ruling coalition in Poland are unequivocally supporting Ukraine,
when it comes to Ukraine and its EU aspirations, all of us should speak in one voice. This is not the time to be attacking each other on this.
I would most likely behave just like Zelenskyy if I was president. They attacked my country and did exactly what the Russians did last week in Poltava, where they bombed a residential block, killing 14 people, including 3 small children.
Others, specifically right-wing and far-right candidates, are much harsher in their approach.
The suspension of US aid is first and foremost bad news for both Ukraine and our region. But all of this is the direct result of Zelenskyy's lack of gratitude and his inability to conduct foreign policies.
Ukrainians come to Poland, get free health care paid for by our taxpayers, and then leave. This is medical tourism.
Karol Nawrocki, the candidate backed by the largest right-wing opposition party, Law and Justice, has recently doubled down on anti-Ukraine rhetorics. This is a 180-degree turn for the Conservatives in Poland, who were once some of Ukraine's staunchest supporters.
Assuming that we might even know what Karol Nawrocki thinks is, I think, quite brave. I don't think that he has any opinions about anything, first of all, because he's not particularly well educated in, let's say, all those details of international situation.
The right-wing candidate has already changed his stance on the peace talks within just 2 weeks.
I am ready to sit with Putin at the negotiating table. Yes, Poland should break off all diplomatic relations with Russia.
Nawrocki also has far-right Sławomir Mencen breathing down his neck in the polls. While ruling coalition candidate Rafał Trzaskowski continues to look as the most probable winner, the gap between Karol Nawrocki and his far-right competitor is narrowing with every poll. According to experts, voters may look at Nawrocki as a populist copycat.
People those who might in the second round vote for Mencen, might reconsider only this will to vote in the second round and actually ask themselves, why don't we vote in the first round for Mencen if Karol Nawrocki basically speaks like him, but he's not genuine in what he tells us?
The Polish government is against sending Polish troops to Ukraine as a peacekeeping force, especially without security guarantees from the United States. The ruling coalition nonetheless continues to stand with Kyiv in its defense against Russia. The same can't be said about the right-wing presidential candidates. Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
Clouds of billowing smoke and ensuing chaos. This is not the picture one would expect to see coming from the parliament of a European country. The events mentioned unfolded at the Serbian Parliament after the opposition set off smoke grenades and tear gas as a way of protesting the current government. Piotr Miszczuk has the story.
Clouds of smoke enveloped the Serbian Parliament on Tuesday, with the opposition set off smoke grenades and tear gas in protest against the government. The opposition MPs also unfurled a banner saying, "Serbia is rising to bring down a regime." This is part of a picture where the ruling Serbian Progressive Party is limiting democracy, according to experts.
In December, for example, the ruling party wanted to adopt illegally 54 laws. And they have done it. Today, the ruling majority wanted to repeat the same scenario, to rubber stamp over the 50 laws.
In the aftermath of the events in Parliament, 3 MPs have reportedly been injured, with one suffering a stroke amid the situation. But according to experts, ruling party MPs have also thrown smoke grenades.
What happened today when a few MPs were injured is that ruling party members hit heavily their peers.
Serbia has been gripped by a political crisis since last November's roof collapse at the Novi Sad train station, which rendered 15 fatalities. Students held countrywide protests against corruption, which in their opinion is omnipresent in Serbia and is the primary reason behind the catastrophe. But Serbians not only blame pro-Russian President Vučić, but also hold a grudge against the EU for its inaction.
The reasons for this basically come down to this long-term policy the EU is employing regarding Serbia, and this is a policy of so-called stabilitocracy, where stability is actually the main goal of the European Union in the region. And the European Union is, let's say, willing to turn a blind eye to some very concerning developments.
At the same time, Serbia is one of Russia's staunchest allies in Europe. It is now mulling a new energy deal with Russia, with the current one set to expire in May. Some media reports said that the new agreement would be signed for up to 30 years, but energy expert Andrzej Szczęsniak doesn't believe that would be the case.
Serbia just now is a very turbulent situation. Oil and gas industry from one side, political turbulence from the other. So I don't think that the pressure is for long-term contract, but to prolong at all the contract.
If Serbia manages to continue its gas purchases from Russia at much below market price levels, it would be even more difficult to take Serbia away from its Russian embrace.
Serbia is full dependent on Russia. Serbia is a landlocked country, and in oil and in gas, the deliveries are from Russia. 100% of the import is from Russia.
The end of the current contract will coincide with Serbian President Vučić's visit to Moscow, a first since the 2022 full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The news of the U.S. suspending military aid to Ukraine is one of the most dramatic developments of the last 24 hours. Leaving Ukraine even more vulnerable than before, this shift in U.S.'s foreign policy resulted in a firm response from the EU and the UK. Charles Grant, founder and director at the Center for European Reform, is joining me now here on World News Tonight to discuss how the EU and the UK are planning to provide security for Ukraine and Europe. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So the U.S. suspended its military aid to Ukraine. What's your response to that news that broke out last night?
Well, the response in London and in Brussels, where I happen to be today, is that this is very serious indeed, that if the U.S. suspends military aid to Ukraine, it'll be hard for Ukraine to keep fighting, even with extra support from European partners, both in the EU and outside the EU, like the UK. Not impossible for Ukraine to keep on fighting for a few more months. And certainly the Europeans will step up their aid. There's a big EU summit on Thursday, the day after tomorrow, where I think there'll be agreement to masses of money to be raised for funding defence expenditure to help Ukraine. So that the current European preoccupation is how can we stay united? How can we get more money to Ukraine? How can we get more military help to Ukraine? And they hope that the US doesn't really mean what it says. They hope that Trump will reconsider this issue. The most important issue, for as far as many European governments are concerned, is so-called backstop. Some of them, like the British and the French, are willing to put soldiers into Ukraine to keep the peace if there is a ceasefire. I know Poland has a different position on that, but some countries are willing to put in soldiers. But if only assuming that the US can provide a so-called backstop and provide military help if the Russians attack the British and the French and others and they get into difficulties. So far, the Americans have not agreed to provide any backstop. So this is the number one concern in London, and I think Paris and Brussels is, can we get the US to give even a sort of very, very minimal kind of backstop, some sort of reassurance that we won't be left to fight Russia on our own if Russia attacks Ukraine again.
But do you think that Europe and the UK actually have what it takes to fill that gap when it comes to support for Ukraine and at the same time supporting its own defense capabilities?
I think that the Europeans and the British can do quite a lot more than they're doing at the moment. I mean, the actual money is not really the big issue. The UK and the EU can find another few tens of billions of pounds a year to plug the gap left by the Americans. Because, in fact, the Europeans have given more help to Ukraine than the Americans anyway, if you add up the money both for military aid and humanitarian aid and economic aid. And some of the military capabilities they can plug as well. They can provide ammunition, they can provide tanks, they can provide vehicles, they can provide aeroplanes. The trouble is there are some things the Americans provide that is hard for the Europeans to substitute. In particular, the satellite network, Starlink, that Elon Musk's outfit provides for Ukraine for communications. Some of the air defense systems like Patriot missiles, some of the ATACMS missiles and other sorts of missiles that Ukraine uses aren't produced in Europe to any large extent. So I think in many respects, the Europeans can plug the gaps left by the Americans, but one or two gaps they can't plug, and that's going to be a problem.
From the latest, according to Reuters exclusive, we have a report that apparently the U.S. and Ukraine managed to reach an agreement when it comes to signing the rare minerals deal. There's supposed to be an announcement made tonight at the White House. Zelenskyy is ready to sign it, as we've learned before. Do you think that this aid announcement actually pushed him towards that decision?
It probably did, because he's desperate. He's desperate that the US doesn't cut off all support for Ukraine. And I'm in Brussels, where I heard a very senior person said to me, there's a rumour that Trump will pull out of NATO in the next few days. I think that's probably not true, hopefully, but it's a very febrile atmosphere and everybody's scared that Trump will do something completely crazy. So if Trump and Zelensky, despite their differences, can agree on a deal to allow America to exploit Ukraine's mineral wealth, that gives the US some commitment to the future of Ukraine. It gives it a stake in the future of Ukraine. And that's not a security guarantee, but it is at least the idea that the Americans can be on the ground getting earths out of this Ukrainian soil. So that's more good news than bad news. And I think it implies that Trump, having humiliated Zelensky on Friday, may be willing to do a deal with him. Because after all, if Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace to Ukraine, and apparently he does, you can't completely ignore the Ukrainian position. He can perhaps get away with ignoring the Europeans to some degree, but he can't really ignore Ukraine, because there can't be a peace in Ukraine without the Ukrainians agreeing to peace. So Trump maybe will have to rethink some of his reluctance to engage with the Ukrainians. I hope Trump also rethinks his reluctance to engage with the Europeans too, but so far there are no signs that he wants to involve the Europeans in the peace talks.
Let's put some spotlight on Europe. We've heard from Ursula von der Leyen, who issued a letter about the plans of rearming Europe. How realistic is this plan, and actually how feasible, and how is it going to be funded?
Well, I think the EU can do money quite easily compared to perhaps providing weapons. The Thursday summit, there will be an agreement almost certainly on some of Mrs. von der Leyen's plans. There'll be new borrowing facilities to borrow money on the model of the recovery fund that was a response to the COVID pandemic. So the EU will borrow money and give money to countries that need to invest in their defence equipment. They'll repurpose existing funds, some of the existing recovery funds, some of the existing funds such as the European Stability Mechanism and the regional funds, the cohesion funds. They'll be repurposed for defence. The EU is quite good at raising hundreds of billions of pounds of money if it really needs to. I think this will happen. The question then is, how will this money, which will, I think, be raised, be transferred into better military capabilities for Ukraine? That's more difficult. So as we've already said, Europe doesn't produce all the things that Ukraine needs militarily, but it produces quite a lot of them. So I think the money is a good start. And the most important European objective at the moment, from talking to leaders in Brussels tonight, is keep united. There are obviously tensions and differences amongst the European Union countries, with Hungary and Slovakia being more sympathetic to Putin than some of the other governments. There are even tensions between Britain and France, so Britain isn't in the EU, on how to run a peacekeeping operation in Ukraine. But it's very important that the Europeans stand together and stay united, so they have some influence and some clout, some authority to speak with one voice. If they're badly divided, nobody will take them seriously. So I think it's very important that the Polish presidency of the European Union manages to knock heads together and make sure people stay in the same place. And I think there are signs that the summit on Thursday may be quite united, at least when these new financial arrangements are discussed. I don't think that even Hungary is creating too many problems at the moment. Getting agreement on Ukraine itself will be rather harder, because Hungary is reluctant to give too much aid to Ukraine.
And now it's time for our final question. One of the major topics when it comes to Europe is the question of nuclear deterrence. We know that France is coming to the forefront when it comes to willing to provide that sort of support for Europe. What about the UK? Does it have the nuclear deterrent capability? And would it actually work together with France? And would it be able to provide that sort of support and security?
Well, the British nuclear deterrent, unlike the French deterrent, is actually available to NATO and therefore is available to the whole of Europe already, which is good. The bad news is that part of it's controlled by the Americans. The British deterrent, the submarines and the warheads are British-owned and British designed and British-made. But the missiles which deliver the warheads are American-controlled, although they need to be serviced about once a year. So if America wanted to be really difficult and nasty to the Brits, it could stop them using the British nuclear deterrent. At least after a year or so, it could stop.
Do you think that this could possibly happen?
In practice. No, I think it's highly, highly unlikely. But of course, Trump is one of the most unpredictable leaders in the world. So I think Britain would be quite willing, as Friedrich Merz has said, to put its nuclear deterrent to the benefit of Europe as a whole, as France would in many respects. But there is the French one, at least, is truly independent, while the British deterrent is not truly independent, at least compared with the French deterrent.
Thank you so much, Charles Grant, founder and director at the Center for European Reform. It's a pleasure to have you with me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back here on TVP World in just a moment with more news and features.